Kevin McCullough.
Welcome back to Times Square. Kevin McCullough, glad to have you with us. That Kevin Show. Always thrilled to have KT McFarland joining us. And as she does so pretty much every week, I love to pick her brain on all things related to our national security. And KT, when it comes to this election, and particularly the crazy month that we've just had, if we're going from the debate through the assassination attempt, through the dropout, through the kind of selection of the new nominee to the coronation of her VP, whatever process you call it, it's not democracy. Let's put it for sure that way. But there are significant differences of policy preferences that really matter in this election. And I'm trying to get across the seriousness of that to the people that I reach each day. And I don't think it demonstrates itself any more problematically than in the area of national security and foreign policy. You've studied a lot of this. You've seen a lot of presidents. You know the kind of ramifications of the different kind of schools of thought on these two kind of viewpoints. How would you describe Kamala's approach to our hostile powers and our friendly powers as being different than Donald Trump's?
Well, it depends on which Kamala Harris you're talking about. I mean, the one of the, the last 20 or 30 years of her policy, or the one of the last 48 hours of her policy. I'm going to go with her lifelong record, particularly her record in the Biden administration. So the most obvious is the border. She was the border czar. She was in charge of the border. She left the border open. In fact, she opened it wider in anticipation of people coming across the border and then having non-citizens vote. I mean, that was the whole point of the Biden-Harris Democrat border policy. They knew they were keeping it open. They wanted to keep it open. They just didn't want you to know that they were keeping it open. But their whole point was to get 10 million new voters. Illegally, by the way. You can't vote if you're not an American citizen. But they were going to worry about that later. So number one would be the border. But then probably equally as important for international policy is the energy policy. You know, she has been a lifelong advocate for a ban on fracking, a ban on American energy production. Biden he just sort of constricted it and had a war on American fossil fuels, but he didn't ban them outright. She wants to ban them outright. And so what would that mean? Well, it would wreak havoc on the American economy. I mean, if you don't like paying $3.50 a gallon for gas, think about how much you're going to love paying $8 a gallon for gas, because we won't make our own energy. But what it will do is it will enrich Russia, it'll enrich Iran, and they'll be able to fight these forever wars forever. The third thing that's most obvious to me is her policy towards Israel, particularly her policy towards Israel and her policy towards Iran. She's absolutely beholden to the far left of her party, as her vice presidential selection would indicate. And the far left of her party doesn't want Israel to exist. So I think that if I were an Israeli, if I were an American Jew, if I were somebody who cares deeply about the future and survival of the state of Israel, which I do, I would be extremely concerned about Harris administration and them withholding weapons to Israel.
So, and I've never fully understood this. I know that the Obama kind of sect of the Democratic Party tends to be very pro-Iran and kind of shuns the Saudi and the Arab involvement in foreign policy. But I don't know where that conflict comes from, KT. Can you give us some context on that? Why does Obama's kind of school of thought follow an empowered Iran as being better for the world than a strong Israel and potentially a strong kind of democratic union working, in free markets and otherwise with their Arab neighbors?
Look, I can't get into their heads because to me it makes no sense whatsoever. But for some reason, they've had this unrequited love affair with Iran going back to the Obama administration. I mean, to the point where on the National Security Council in the Obama administration, their main Middle East guy, their main Iran guy, the guy who was running Iran negotiations, was a guy who was working for Iran, who was taking suggestions, shall we say, from the Iranian foreign ministry, to the point where the guy is now under serious investigation, I assume, for treason. And has been relieved of his positions in the U.S. government. This guy was also the guy who was Biden's chief Iran negotiator. So the connections with Iran are wide and they're deep in the Democrat Party. But the anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic pro-Palestinian. I mean, I guess they figure in their own minds that if they're somehow pro-Hamas and pro-Palestinian, that's going to bring peace to the Middle East. That the biggest abuser of peace in the Middle East in their minds is supposed to, I guess, Israel.
Well, I'm not even sure that Kamala thinks of it that deeply. I think she thought it was her two-state solution, as you've frequently joked on this show. But you saw her overnight numbers immediately when it went from Biden to her in Michigan and Minnesota, just, go exponentially up.
Yeah. She's a far left member of the Democrat Party. She's comfortable with the squad. She's comfortable with the anti-Semitic wing. I mean, I never thought, Kevin, that in my lifetime we would see the Democrat Party, which had always been the champion of Israel, the champion of the Jews, the champion of their rights, to somehow flip. And so now the Democrats are much more concerned with the people, the wing of their party that chants death to Israel, death to America, pro-Hamas, kill all the Jews. So somehow that wing of their party is determining their foreign policy.
And sometimes they're doing it right in our streets. Like that's the part that kind of blows me away as well. Let me shift to China, because I did not know until she announced that Kamala has a very kind of complex, thorny relationship with the communist Chinese, and Tim Walz does as well. In fact, he's spent time living in China and holding an American security clearance. I didn't even know you could do such a thing. But what's your concern there?
Okay, the problem with her vice presidential selection, Tim Walz, is he was in China more than 30 times over the last decade or so, and speaks very warmly and fondly of China. Now, he says now that one of the reasons he was so concerned with China was because of China's human rights record. But, I've been working on Chinese relations and Chinese affairs since the early 1970s, when I was Henry Kissinger's aide when he made the secret trip to China. And we had the opening to China. And the Chinese government does not make people welcome if they're critics of the Chinese government. Walz has said many times, the Chinese government made me feel right at home and really helped my visits to China. Well, China doesn't have, immediate, they play the long game in China.
KT McFarland, you are so insightful. Thank you for your help. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Kev.
Stick around for more of That Kevin. Next, That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough.